Fiancé humiliates and abandons her days before the wedding. Months later, she becomes the nurse of a paraplegic millionaire CEO, and what they discover together shocks everyone. Before we continue, comment on which city you are watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy. The morning sun barely filtered through the sheer curtains of the cozy diner in Seattle's Capitol Hill, but it already warmed the skin of Rachel Harper as she settled into a cushioned booth, the scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapping around her like a comfort she hadn't realized she craved. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress that brought out the hazel in her eyes, still sparkling with anticipation. It was just another day, or so she thought, until Michael, her fiancé, slid into the booth across from her. He didn't smile. He didn't touch the latte the waitress had just set down. His eyes, usually warm, were dull, distant, as if they belonged to someone else. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady, almost sharp. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. The tone wasn't that of someone discussing wedding plans, set for 10 days from now. She tried to smile, to mask the unease, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her mug. Michael avoided her gaze. Instead, he pulled a small black velvet box from his pocket, identical to the one he'd used months ago when he proposed under the soft lights of a dinner cruise on Puget Sound. But now, as he opened the box, he didn't offer it to her. He extended it with a curt gesture, like delivering an ultimatum. "I need the ring back, Rachel. The family ring." The world seemed to slow. The clink of silverware from nearby tables, the muffled laughter of a couple in the next booth, the hum of the air conditioning, it all melted into a deafening silence. Rachel blinked, stunned, as if Michael's words were in a language she couldn't pass. The ring, a delicate gold band with an emerald embedded in it, gleamed in the box like an accusation. She slipped it off her finger slowly, the weight of the gesture feeling like she was tearing away a piece of herself. "Michael, what's going on?" Her voice came out faint, almost a whisper, but laced with a plea she couldn't hide. He hesitated for a moment, then squared his shoulders, as if bracing for a final blow. "I can't marry you, Rachel. It's not right anymore." He paused, his eyes fixed on some point beyond her. "I'm with someone else. Vanessa Brooks." The name hit Rachel like a stone to the chest. Vanessa Brooks, the daughter of a tech mogul, a woman who seemed to glide above everyone with her untouchable beauty and her magazine cover life. Rachel had seen her once at a charity gala where Michael was working as a financial consultant. Vanessa had flashed her a polite but icy smile, as if she knew something Rachel didn't. Now it all clicked. "You..." Rachel swallowed hard, fighting the tears threatening to spill. "How long?" "It doesn't matter," he replied with a coldness that made her flinch. "It's better this way for both of us." "Better? How could it be better?" Rachel wanted to scream, to throw her coffee in his face, to beg him to say it was a cruel joke. But she did none of that. She handed over the ring, feeling the cold metal against her palm, and watched Michael tuck it into his pocket as if it were just another trinket, not the symbol of a future they'd planned together. He stood, left a few bills on the table, and walked out of the diner without another word. Rachel sat frozen, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. The people around her carried on with their conversations, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered her life. 10 days. Just 10 days until the wedding. The dress was ready, the invitations sent, the dreams woven into every detail. And now it was all crumbling. The hours that followed blurred together. Rachel wandered the streets of Capitol Hill aimlessly, her heels clicking against the pavement, as if trying to jolt her back to reality. When she finally reached the apartment she shared with Michael in Fremont, the door was slightly ajar, mocking her vulnerability. She pushed it open with hesitation and found her belongings neatly packed into suitcases by the entrance. This wasn't Michael's doing. He'd never be so meticulous. Her clothes were folded, her books stacked with precision, her personal items wrapped in tissue paper. Someone had been paid to do this, to erase her presence with cruel efficiency. In the bedroom, her wedding dress hung on its hanger, pristine, a ghost of a future that would never come. Rachel sank to her knees in the hallway, the weight of betrayal and rejection crushing her. Tears came, hot and uncontrollable, as she clutched one of the suitcases, as if she could hold on to the fragments of her life slipping through her fingers. She didn't enter the bedroom. She couldn't. The dress, with its delicate lace and hand-stitched pearls, was too painful a reminder. With nowhere else to turn, Rachel grabbed her phone with trembling hands and called the one person who had always been there, even in the darkest moments. Her mother, Ellen. Ellen's warm, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Rachel, honey, what's wrong?" "Mum." Rachel's voice broke, choked by sobs. I don't know what to do." "You don't have to explain now. The door's open, sweetheart. Come home." The drive to Queen Anne was a haze of city lights and scattered thoughts. Ellen's modest apartment, a cozy haven with walls lined with old photos and worn furniture, felt like the only safe place in the world. Ellen, with her grey hair pulled into a loose bun and a faded apron, enveloped her daughter in a wordless embrace. That night, Rachel slept in her childhood bedroom under a quilt that smelled of cedar and memories. Ellen left a pot of chamomile tea on the nightstand, and the warmth of the mug in Rachel's hands was the only comfort she could find. The days that followed were a test of endurance. Rachel returned to her job at the hospital, where she worked as a nurse in the rehabilitation ward, but every forced smile for her patients was a struggle. Her colleagues noticed the dark circles under her eyes, her quietness, but she brushed off their questions with a wave of her hand. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to relive the humiliation. Until one rainy morning, while sipping coffee in the break room, she overheard a conversation that changed everything. "Did you see this posting?" said Jenna, a co-worker, scrolling through an email on her phone. "Some rich guy in Aspen, Colorado looking for a nurse to manage his rehab. Insane salary, housing included." "Sounds too good to be true," another colleague laughed. "But they say nobody lasts more than 2 weeks with the guy. He's a bear." Rachel looked up, intrigued. Something about the offer made her pause. Maybe it was the desperation for a change, a reason to leave Seattle and all the memories of Michael. Maybe it was just curiosity. She jotted down the contact info, feeling a strange mix of hope and fear. Days later, Rachel was on a flight to Aspen, her suitcase stowed and her heart still in pieces. The mansion where the interview would take place was a breathtaking blend of stone and glass, nestled among towering pines and the crisp mountain air. As she stepped out of the taxi, she felt the weight of the unknown. Who was this man nobody could handle? And why, despite everything, did she feel this was the start of something she couldn't explain? The housekeeper, Margaret, a middle-aged woman with a stern posture and sharp eyes, greeted her at the entrance. "You're punctual, I like that," she said with a slight nod of approval. "Let's be clear. Mr. James Carter, 36, was in a skiing accident 9 months ago. He needs someone to manage his physical rehabilitation and, frankly, someone with patience. He's not easy." Rachel nodded, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. When she finally met James, he was facing away, staring out a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the snow-dusted garden. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that filled the room, even from a wheelchair. His dark hair fell over his forehead, and when he turned to face her, his gaze was cold, almost cutting. "I bet you'll quit in 4 days," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. Rachel held his stare, surprised by her own boldness. "I bet I won't," she replied, with a steadiness she didn't know she had. James let out a dry, humorless laugh. That night, alone in the mansion's guest room, Rachel read through the contract Margaret had given her. The terms were clear, the salary tempting, but the real challenge lay between the lines, surviving this man and the weight of her own pain. The next day, Rachel followed Margaret through the mansion's halls to the gym where James waited. Margaret warned her, "Don't take his words personally. He hasn't been the same since the accident." Rachel nodded, but the warning only tightened the knot in her stomach. Who was James Carter, really? A man broken by the accident, as they said, or something more? In the gym, the air smelled of disinfectant and rubber. Rehabilitation equipment, parallel bars, treadmills, weights, was arranged with precision as if rarely used. James was there, facing away as he had the day before, staring out a window at a lake shrouded in mist. The wheelchair seemed an extension of him, but there was something in his posture, tense shoulders, clenched hands, that hinted at an inner battle. Rachel cleared her throat, announcing her presence. "I see you're stubborn," he said without turning, his voice deep with a hint of disdain. "The last nurse lasted 3 days. What's your record for patience?" Rachel took a deep breath, recalling Margaret's advice. "I'm not here to break records. I'm here to help." She stepped forward, keeping her voice steady. "So, where do we start?" James turned his chair, and for the first time Rachel saw his eyes up close. They were a deep green, almost grey, flickering between anger and something softer, perhaps pain. He studied her for a long moment, as if sizing her up before pointing to a clipboard on the table. "The rehab plan. Margaret should have given it to you. Follow it, and don't expect me to make it easy." The days that followed were a trial by fire. James was demanding, often cruel in his words. He criticized every move Rachel made, every adjustment to the exercises, as if testing her limits. "You handle the weights like a kid scared of breaking a toy," he sneered once with a mocking smile. But Rachel didn't back down. She responded with calm, adjusted the equipment with precision, and slowly began to notice cracks in his armor. On the 3rd night, unable to sleep, Rachel heard a noise from the gym. It was late, nearly midnight, and the mansion was cloaked in silence. Curiosity piqued, she crept downstairs, her heart racing. When she opened the gym door, she froze. James was standing, gripping the parallel bars, his face twisted with effort, his body trembling as he tried to take a step. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his arms, strong despite months of immobility, shook under his own weight. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice raw, almost desperate, as he noticed her. Rachel didn't move. Something in his vulnerability, in the anger mixed with fear, held her there. "Why hide this?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "You're walking." "That's incredible." James glared at her, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. For a moment she thought he'd yell again, but he just lowered his head, his shoulders slumping as if the world's weight had doubled. "Because when they think you're better, they expect miracles," he said, almost a whisper. "And I'm tired of disappointing. My family, my friends, my company, they all expect me to be who I was, but I'm not that man anymore." Rachel stepped closer, ignoring the voice in her head, urging her to back off. "I don't expect miracles, James. I just want to help. And I'll keep your secret." He looked up, surprised, as if no one had ever offered something so simple. For a moment the gym was silent, save for the distant whistle of wind against the windows. The days that followed brought a fragile but promising routine. Rachel adjusted the exercises, tracked tiny progress, and James, though still distant, began to respond with less hostility. They spoke little, but each word carried weight. One morning, as Rachel organized the equipment, she heard raised voices from James's office. The door was slightly ajar, and she recognized the voice of a man who'd visited the mansion before. Thomas, James's business partner. The conversation was tense, laced with veiled accusations. "So you need to trust me, James," Thomas said, his calm sounding rehearsed. "This merger with the Brooks Group is the best thing for the company. They have resources, connections." "And what do I get out of it?" James shot back, his voice sharp. "Losing control of everything I built." Rachel froze at the mention of Brooks. Could it be a coincidence? She stepped away from the door, her heart racing, but Thomas's words echoed in her mind. That night after dinner, she gathered her courage and knocked on James's office door. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. He was at the window, as usual, the wheelchair positioned to face the dark horizon. "If it's about exercises, it can wait until tomorrow," he said without turning. "It's not that." Rachel took a deep breath. "I overheard you and Thomas today. He mentioned the Brooks. Is that Vanessa Brooks's family?" James turned the chair slowly, his face hardening. "What do you know about the Brooks?" Rachel swallowed, feeling the weight of her confession. "My fiancé, ex-fiancé. He left me for her. A few weeks ago." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "I don't know what's going on, but I hope you don't trust that woman or whatever's behind this deal." The air in James's office grew thick, electric, like the sky before a storm. The name Brooks, dropped by Rachel in that trembling confession, hung between them, no longer a coincidence but a dark thread tying their worlds of pain. James turned his wheelchair slowly, the smooth hum of the mechanism at odds with the tension in his shoulders. His eyes, that deep green that Rachel had learned to read, held no trace of their usual sarcasm. There was something older there, more dangerous, the sharp glint of a predator spotting a threat. "Vanessa Brooks," he repeated, his voice low, a contained growl that sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. "So the world isn't just small, it's viciously connected." He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching until it nearly snapped. It wasn't a look of pity or morbid curiosity. It was the gaze of someone weighing pieces on a chessboard. Rachel felt exposed, as if he could see through her competent nurse facade to the humiliated woman abandoned in a Seattle diner. But for the first time since that day, she didn't feel shame. She held his gaze, her breath caught in her chest, feeling a strange surge of strength from their shared vulnerability. "What else do you know about them?" James's question was direct, cutting, the voice of a man used to commanding, extracting information, getting to the heart of the matter. Rachel swallowed hard, piecing together the fragments of her humiliation into a coherent story. "Not much. Michael, my ex-fiancé, was a financial consultant, ambitious. He met her at a charity gala. It was quick. In a week, he ended our 2-year engagement, asked for the family ring back, and said he was with her." She shrugged, a gesture meant to downplay the still raw wound. "He said it was better this way. For him, it definitely was." James maneuvered his chair closer to the window, his fingers drumming on the armrest. The night outside was a deep velvet, speckled with distant lights. "Better this way," he muttered, his tone dripping with contempt not aimed at her, the phrase cowards use to justify their betrayal. He turned to her, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Thomas, my partner, my childhood friend, has been pushing me for months to accept a merger with the Brooks Group. Vanessa's father, Richard Brooks, is a shark, a vulture in a designer suit. He wants my tech and medical systems company, but not at a fair price. He wants control, the patents, the soul of the business I built from nothing." With each word, the air in the room grew heavier. Rachel felt like she'd stumbled into a minefield. "I turned down every offer," James continued, his voice now a steel thread. "I told Thomas I'd rather burn the company than hand it over to Richard. 2 weeks later, I had the accident." He spat the word like poison. "My ski bindings failed on a black diamond run. The investigation was inconclusive. The police filed it as a fluke that luckily didn't kill me, but I know it wasn't an accident." Rachel's world tilted. The pain of a broken heart felt almost trivial against this revelation. This wasn't a romantic drama, it was a conspiracy. "You think the Brooks?" she whispered, the enormity of the suspicion stealing her breath. "I think they tried to take me out of the game for good." James's gaze was hard as stone. A with me gone Thomas, who's always been more pragmatic, would have the power to greenlight the merger. He'd become president of a Brooks Group subsidiary, and Richard would get my tech for pennies. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers, connecting the final piece. "They didn't count on 2 things, me surviving and you, the woman their pawn discarded, showing up at my door." A chill ran through her. "But it was a coincidence. I saw the job posting at the hospital." In that moment, something shifted. The patient-nurse, boss-employee dynamic dissolved. All that remained were the 2 of them, her pain and his rage intertwined, forging something new, something solid and dangerous. The days that followed were a silent test of that unspoken alliance. James didn't bring up the topic openly again, but a new urgency took hold of his nights. After the staff retired and the mansion fell quiet, the light in his office stayed on. Rachel, in her room, heard the soft clack of his keyboard, the rustle of pages, the sound of a man waging a solitary war. She, meanwhile, threw herself into his rehabilitation with renewed ferocity. The gym sessions were no longer a test of patience, but a mission. "One more set," she'd say, her voice firm, wiping sweat from his brow. "You can do more." He stopped complaining. He gritted his teeth, his body trembling with effort, and pushed through. Every inch of progress wasn't just about walking, it was about fighting. One night, a week after the confession, exhaustion overtook Rachel. She fell asleep over a physiotherapy textbook in her armchair and woke with a start to the silence. It was nearly 3 in the morning. The house was too quiet. Guided by instinct, she padded downstairs, barefoot on the cold hardwood. The light in James's office glowed, the door slightly ajar. She peeked through the gap. He wasn't at his desk. He stood on the other side of the room, facing a massive whiteboard covered in diagrams, names and arrows, linking companies and people. And he was standing, alone, leaning on a metal cane she'd never seen. His body was tense but upright. He studied the board with the focus of a general planning an invasion. Rachel's heart leapt. She didn't feel the shock of the first time she'd seen him stand. She felt a surge of admiration so intense, it left her breathless. He wasn't just recovering, he was rising. She stepped back before he noticed, her heart pounding unevenly. Back in her room, she sat on the bed, her mind racing. This man didn't need a nurse. He needed an ally, and she could no longer stand on the sidelines, watching. The next day, after the physiotherapy session, as she put away the weights, she made a decision. James! He was in his wheelchair, toweling off his face, his breath still heavy. He looked up. I know you're investigating the Brooks, and I know you're doing it alone. She was direct, no nonsense. That stops today. What are you proposing? A real partnership. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You have the strategy, the intelligence, the knowledge of the corporate game. I have the ability to observe, to listen, to go unnoticed. Let me help. Let me be your eyes and ears. A long silence settled. He studied her, his gaze sweeping her face, searching for hesitation, a bluff. He found none, only the same determination he saw in his own reflection. Finally, he extended his hand. Not for a formal shake, but an invitation. Then welcome aboard. I could use the help. She took his hand. The contact was firm, warm, not the touch of a patient or a boss, the touch of a partner. In that handshake, their secret alliance was sealed. From that night on, the lights didn't burn only in James's office. The office door opened silently and Rachel stepped in, balancing a silver tray with 2 steaming mugs of strong coffee. The bitter, robust aroma cut through the scent of paper and the static hum of monitors, a fragrance of vigilance and conspiracy. James looked up from the sprawl of documents on his oak desk. A faint smile, a rarity that still felt like an event, touched the corner of his lips. Rachel's simple act of entering his war room had become a nightly ritual, the quiet marker that turned the sleeping mansion into a command center. Coffee, the fuel of revolutionaries, he said, his voice deep with a trace of humor that hadn't existed weeks before. And insomniacs, Rachel added, setting a mug by his hand. What's on the menu tonight? Another round of decoding Thomas's creative accounting? Something better, an invitation. He slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen, a formal email announced an emergency board meeting for Carter Innovations. The agenda? Deliberation on the strategic merger proposal with the Brooks Group. The date was set for 2 weeks from now in Seattle. It's their endgame, James said, his gaze hardening. Thomas thinks I'm isolated, broken, out of the picture. He'll present his doctored reports, paint the company as teetering on collapse, and position himself as the savior handing control to the Brooks. Rachel's stomach twisted. 2 weeks, is that enough time? It'll have to be. James turned to the massive whiteboard dominating the wall, now a complex web of names, dates, and red arrows tying Thomas's betrayal to the sabotage of his skis and Richard Brooks's greed. At the center, circled, were the names Vanessa and Michael. We have the pieces, Rachel. The emails, the call logs our investigator dug up, the statement from the mechanic Thomas paid to check my skis before shipping him off to the East Coast. We have almost everything. We're missing the cherry on top. The confession. They'll never confess. Not in their right minds. Exactly. A dangerous glint sparked in James's eyes. That's why we need to get them out of their comfort zone. Make them feel so victorious, so arrogant, they let their guard down. And that's where you come in. The plan he laid out over the next few nights was bold, risky, and bordered on theatrical genius. It demanded absolute trust and nerves of steel, while James, with the help of fiercely loyal lawyers, prepared the legal assault. Rachel was given her mission. She was the wild card, the invisible agent. Under the guise of sourcing advanced rehab equipment, she went to Seattle. She didn't look for equipment, she looked for people. She tracked down Thomas's former assistant, a bitter woman fired for knowing too much. With the right mix of empathy and the promise of a generous consulting fee funded by James, Rachel gained access to old passwords and office routines. She got the floor plan of the executive suite. Most crucially, she confirmed that the boardroom was a fortress of security, but the adjacent IT room was its blind spot. The night before the meeting was the longest of their lives. They didn't sleep. They spent hours reviewing every detail, every potential flaw, every contingency. "You don't have to do this, Rachel," James said in a rare moment of hesitation, seeing the pallor on her face under the desk lamp's glow. "It's dangerous. More dangerous than being dumped 10 days before my wedding, more dangerous than watching the man I loved turn into a pawn in a dirty game." She shook her head, her hazel eyes unwavering. "I need to do this, James. For you. And maybe a little for me. To close that door for good." The next morning, the boardroom of Carter Innovations was exactly as Rachel had pictured, a glass-walled arena of power and tension. Disguised with a tech support badge and a uniform that rendered her nearly invisible, she slipped into the control room minutes before the meeting began. Her heart pounded a symphony of panic and adrenaline. With trembling but precise hands, she activated the listening device a technician loyal to James had installed the previous night. The boardroom voices came through her earpiece, clear and sharp. She watched on the monitor as Thomas opened the meeting, his tone grandiose, his feigned sympathy as he mentioned James's absence. She saw Richard Brooks, the shark, and his daughter Vanessa, the embodiment of triumph. And then she saw Michael. He looked like a ghost at a feast, uneasy, out of place. His eyes flicked to the camera for a second, and Rachel felt a pang of something no longer pain but a distant kind of pity. "For the good of the company he loved so much," Thomas's voice said in her ear. Rachel took a deep breath. Now. The double doors swung open, and the script they'd rehearsed to exhaustion came to life. James's entrance was a masterstroke. The shocked silence, the pale faces, the sheer disbelief. Rachel felt a swell of pride watching him walk, each step a declaration of war, the cane not a sign of weakness but of power. She heard Thomas's desperate denial. With a tap on her tablet, she started the presentation. The giant screen came alive, and the evidence of betrayal played out piece by piece, synced with James's relentless narrative. Each email, each transaction, was a shovel of dirt on the conspiracy's grave. Rachel watched the faces on the monitor twist. Thomas's arrogance crumbled into panic. Richard's fury was impotent, and Michael's face held pure terror when James pointed the cane at him. Her loyalty wasn't for sale. When James glanced toward her, through the one-way glass that hid her, Rachel felt as if he could see her. In that look, their alliance, their trust, all the sleepless nights solidified. She was no longer a victim. She was an architect of this justice. The vote was swift, brutal. Thomas's removal was unanimous. The Brooks and Michael's exit was the final scene of a play reaching its end. Rachel watched Michael leave last, a broken man who'd bet everything on greed and lost even himself. She shut off the audio system, the sudden silence in her ears a welcome relief. When the room emptied, she stepped out from her hiding spot. James stood in the center of the boardroom, leaning on his cane, the weight of the battle finally visible in his shoulders. He looked exhausted, but his eyes shone with a light she'd never seen before. "We did it," he said, his voice thick. "You did it," she replied, stepping closer, her smile genuine and radiant. "You walked in here and took back what was yours. I just held the flashlight." He shook his head slowly. "A flashlight in the dark is worth more than the sun at noon, Rachel. You were my flashlight." He took a step toward her, closing the distance. The air in the room, once thick with betrayal, now hummed with a different electricity, one that had nothing to do with business or revenge. It was something else. He raised his free hand and, with a gentleness that belied the strength he'd just shown, touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "It's over," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely a breath, lost in the deep green of his eyes. "It's over." James's touch was like a match struck in the dark. The roughness of his skin against the softness of Rachel's face, the intensity in his gaze, dissolved the last shred of formality between them. The air in the boardroom, once thin with tension, was now heavy, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the victory they'd just claimed. It was the raw, undeniable energy of months of pain, loneliness, and struggle finally finding a spark. When his lips met hers, it wasn't a kiss of celebration. It was a kiss of recognition. There was the urgency of someone who'd stood at the edge of the abyss and found a hand to hold. There was the ferocity of months of suppressed anger, now transformed into overwhelming passion. And above all, there was a profound tenderness, the silent gratitude of two souls seeing each other, truly, for the first time. Rachel responded with equal intensity, her hands sliding to his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The outside world, with its skyscrapers and cold logic, vanished. All that existed was the heat of that kiss, the taste of coffee and victory, the feeling of finally being home, not in a place but in a moment. James's cane fell to the floor with a dull thud, forgotten. He didn't need it anymore. He leaned into Rachel, his strong frame pressing her against the glass wall, the city of Seattle sprawling below them, indifferent to the fire consuming them. The kiss deepened, growing hotter, more demanding. James's hands slid down her back, mapping every curve as if he wanted to memorize the geography of the woman who'd saved him. Her breath hitched, a sigh escaping her lips as he trailed kisses down her neck, his stubble grazing her skin, sending shivers through her body. "Rachel?" he murmured against her skin, his voice rough, almost unrecognizable. "Let's go home, James," she whispered, the word home taking on a new meaning. It wasn't just his mansion anymore. It was wherever they were together. The drive back to Aspen was a blur of charged silences and fleeting touches. In the back seat of the car, separated from the driver by tinted glass, they didn't need words. James's hand found Rachel's and held it, their fingers laced in a silent promise. Every glance was a continuation of the conversation their bodies had begun in the boardroom. When the car pulled up to the mansion's grand facade, night had fully fallen. The house, once a cold refuge of stone and solitude, felt different. The lights glowing in the windows seemed warmer, more inviting. Margaret opened the door before they reached it. Her face, usually a mask of stoic efficiency, held relief and astonishment. She saw James step out of the car, walking unaided, and her eyes brimmed with tears. "Mr. James!" But her gaze quickly shifted to Rachel, and the gratitude in her eyes was so profound that Rachel felt a flush of embarrassment. "You," Margaret began, her voice catching. "You did what no one else could. You brought him back to us. Thank you." Rachel gave a shy smile, knowing James's transformation wasn't her doing, but his own. She'd only given him a reason to fight. James dismissed the driver and Margaret with a nod, his eyes never leaving Rachel's. As the door closed, shutting out the world, he took her hand and led her up the grand staircase, not to her guest room, but to his own bedroom, a sanctuary she'd never entered. The room was vast, masculine, dominated by a massive bed and a floor-to-ceiling window revealing a moonlit garden, but Rachel barely noticed the decor. Her focus was on James, on the way he looked at her, as if she were the only thing that mattered in the universe. There, urgency gave way to slow, deliberate exploration. He kissed her again, but this time with a reverence that stole her breath. Each piece of clothing was removed with torturous slowness, each inch of exposed skin cherished. He traced the emotional scars Michael's betrayal had left, as if his touch could erase them. And she, in turn, explored his body, not as a nurse assessing a patient, but as a lover discovering new terrain. She kissed the scar on his shoulder, a remnant of the accident, not with pity, but with an acceptance that freed him from the last ghost. That night, they didn't just make love with their bodies, they made love with their stories, their pains, their victories. It was a collision of two solitudes that together created an entire universe. For James, it was the rediscovery of an intimacy he thought he'd lost forever. For Rachel, it was the discovery of a passion she never knew could exist, so overwhelming and complete that it healed every old wound. The weeks that followed were like breathing new air. The mansion, once silent and somber, came alive. Rachel's laughter echoed through the halls. The piano in the living room, silent for nearly a year, was played again by James, melancholic melodies giving way to hopeful compositions. They built new rituals, dinners in the kitchen, where Rachel's attempts at gourmet cooking led to delicious disasters and fits of laughter. Morning walks in the garden, where James, now walking with growing confidence, told her about the stars and the trees, and she shared her dreams of opening a small palliative care clinic. They developed a private language of inside jokes and comfortable silences, where each other's presence was enough. One night, a few weeks later, they sat by the fireplace, the flames crackling, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The day had been good. James had chaired his first full board meeting since his return, firm and in command. Rachel had spent the afternoon sketching plans for her future clinic. "I've been thinking," James said, breaking the comfortable silence. He seemed oddly nervous. He stood, walked to a discreet safe behind a painting, and returned. In his hand was a small velvet box, not black like Michael's, but a deep blue, the color of a midnight sky. Rachel's heart stopped. A flash of the diner, the humiliation, threatened to invade the moment. James seemed to sense her hesitation. He knelt before her, not in a formal proposal, but as an equal. "Rachel, look at me." His voice was soft but firm. "This isn't about the past. It's not about replacing a bad memory with a new one. It's about us, about now." He opened the box. Inside rested a platinum ring, simple and elegant. At its center, a single emerald, not large or showy, but a deep, clear green that seemed to hold an entire galaxy. It was strikingly similar to the ring she'd lost, yet entirely different, stronger, purer. "When I was in the hospital after the accident, I looked at my hands and didn't recognize them. They belonged to a broken man who'd lost everything." He took her hand, lacing their fingers. "With you, I remember who I am. Not the man I was before, but the man I can be. The man I want to be." He lifted the ring from the box but didn't try to place it on her finger. He held it in his palm. "You don't have to answer now. You don't have to promise anything. I know you have your own dreams to build, your own life to claim. I just want you to know that for me, this isn't the end of the journey. It's the start. And I can't imagine taking the next step without you." The tears in Rachel's eyes weren't from pain or memory. They were from a happiness so overwhelming it ached. She looked at the ring gleaming in his palm, then at his eyes, filled with a vulnerability and strength she loved. Slowly, she took the ring. The metal was cool against her skin, but warmed instantly. With a deliberate motion, she slid it onto her ring finger. It fit perfectly. "I'm not going to promise," she said, her voice thick, "but I'm not going to say no either." She leaned in and kissed him, a soft kiss full of unspoken promises, and a future they'd build together, not from old dreams, but from a reality that was infinitely better. The fire crackled, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to celebrate the silence that followed the kiss. The reassuring weight of the ring on Rachel's finger was a constant, tangible reminder that the future, once a landscape of fear and uncertainty, was now a canvas of endless possibilities. James held her close, his chin resting on her head, and for the first time in ages they both felt a deep peace, the calm that comes not from the absence of storms, but from the certainty of having found a safe harbor in each other. The months that followed were a melody composed in a new rhythm. Life was no longer a battle for survival or a war for justice. It became a daily exploration of small joys. James, freed from the chains of vengeance and bitterness, dove back into his company but with a new perspective. He was no longer the ruthless entrepreneur living for work. He became a leader who valued people, who fostered innovation with purpose, and who, to everyone's surprise, introduced a flexible hours policy, insisting no one should sacrifice life for work. He made it a point to be home every night for dinner. Rachel, meanwhile, blossomed. With James's support and encouragement, her dream of a palliative care clinic took shape. She spent days researching, studying business models, and visiting other centers. She was no longer the nurse following orders. She was a visionary, designing a place that would offer not just treatment, but dignity, comfort, and compassion to patients in their most vulnerable moments. James watched, captivated, as the strong, independent woman emerged, growing more confident each day. He didn't love her despite her strength. He loved her because of it. The mansion transformed. The gym, once a place of pain and solitary effort, became a space where they sometimes danced clumsily to old songs. The gardens, once just a view from the window, became the backdrop for long hand-in-hand walks. The house was no longer a fortress of isolation, but a vibrant home, filled with laughter and plans. 6 months after the ring found her finger, on a bright spring morning, James walked into the library where Rachel was poring over blueprints for her clinic. "Pack your bags," he said, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. "Bags? For where?" she asked, looking up, intrigued. "It's a surprise. Just pack summer clothes and that dress of yours that matches the color of the ocean at noon." 2 days later, they landed at a small airport in Maine. Her car took them along a winding road, through lush forests and past the sparkling blue of the Atlantic. Their destination was a quiet fishing village, barely touched by mass tourism, and a minimalist beach house of glass and wood, nestled in a private cove. The sand was soft and white, and the sea, a translucent turquoise, lapped gently at the shore. "James, what is this place?" Rachel whispered, awestruck, as she stepped barefoot onto the warm sand. "This is where my dad used to bring me when I was a kid. Before Carter Innovations, before the money, before everything. It was just him, me, and the ocean. I haven't been here since he passed." He looked at her, his eyes raw with emotion. "I wanted to share my beginning with you since you were the one who gave me a new start. Those days at the beach were magical, suspended in time." They woke to the sound of waves, spent mornings swimming in the calm sea, afternoons reading in hammocks on the porch, and evenings dining on fresh lobster bought straight from the fishermen under a sky so starry it seemed unreal. On their last afternoon, they walked along the beach as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. James no longer limped. His stride was steady, confident, that of a man at peace with himself. He stopped and turned to the sea, watching the waves come and go, erasing their footprints in the sand. "Do you think we ever go back to who we were before?" he asked, his voice thoughtful, almost a whisper carried by the sea breeze. Rachel stood beside him, following his gaze to the endless horizon. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of all they'd been through. She thought of the Rachel from before, the naive woman who believed in a fairy tale love and shattered with the first storm. She thought of James, the arrogant, solitary genius who hid behind his armor of success. She turned to him, a serene and knowing smile lighting her face. The setting sun reflected in her eyes, making them glow like molten gold. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining, the emerald ring catching the last ray of light. "I hope not," she said, her voice clear and steady over the murmur of the waves, "because who we've become now is so much better." She stepped closer and kissed him, a kiss salty with the sea, sweet with love, and deep with mutual understanding. It wasn't the fevered kiss of newfound passion or the desperate kiss of survivors. It was the calm, certain kiss of partners, two souls who hadn't just found each other, but had helped each other find themselves. James wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of salt and Rachel. He understood. The past wasn't something to erase or overcome. The scars, both visible and invisible, were part of them. They were the map that had led them here, to this moment, to this beach. They weren't patched-up versions of who they used to be. They were new versions, forged in the fire of adversity, stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more capable of love. As the last arc of the sun sank into the ocean, leaving a sky ablaze, they stood there, hand in hand, looking to the future. They didn't know what it would bring. There would be other storms, other challenges. But for the first time, they weren't afraid, because they knew that as long as they were together, no matter how fierce the wind or how high the waves, they were each other's safe harbor. And that was all that mattered. Their story wasn't about a happy ending. It was about a true beginning, one they chose to write together, with every day, every sunrise, every wave that broke on the shore. What did you think of the story? Leave your opinion in the comments with a score from 0 to 10. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to follow all our stories. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.